What is up, everybody? Good evening. Welcome to our Monday night segment of the D&D Sports Show. We are going to cover all the action that happened this weekend, from NCAA to NFL. And I mean, what a weekend it was, David. What'd you think?
Yeah, it was full of action. Not a whole lot of surprises over the weekend. Maybe a few games that are a lot closer than a lot of people thought they would be. But ultimately nothing too crazy in the sports world this weekend.
I mean, we did see. I guess we're gonna lead. We're gonna go big with the lead on Saturday. We saw a huge game Saturday night between Clemson and Notre Dame. It went uh, to OT. Notre Dame ended up with the upset. I mean, you couldn't script this game any more than the way it was. I mean, what a game. Um, you know, and at the end of the night, COVID who? I mean, they swarmed that field like it was the '90s. But what'd you think? What were your takeaways from this game?
I think that this game showed me that there is literally no way that this Notre Dame team is going to make the college football playoff. And I'm going to tell you this is the reason. Is because a true freshman quarterback, granted he's a five-star recruit, an outstanding athlete, there's nothing wrong with him, but he had a pretty average day in terms of passing, in terms of completion percentage, with just over 50%, but he threw for over 400 yards on this defense. And this Clemson team was playing without its Heisman contending quarterback. And I think that in the ACC championship game this later this year, I think this Clemson team is going to prove that they're going to take this game to heart. The refs kind of gave Notre Dame a few calls there towards the end. With a late hit penalty that ultimately cost Clemson. A whole series of drives, a questionable hitting of Ian Book as he literally was stepping out of bounds. He got hit. It's ultimately that kind of really hurt their chances. But I do think that the fact they only beat this team by 7 points. They had the lead, they gave it up, they choked it. I don't think that this team beats Trevor Lawrence. I think Trevor Lawrence is a game changer. And I think that if Trevor Lawrence was in this game would have been a completely different story.
And I mean, we're not taking anything away from Notre Dame here. I mean, they played well. Kyron Williams, 140 yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, what a game to go off. Two undefeated teams going at it. You had great. This was an all-around great game. I mean, Clemson had two receivers and 130 plus yards receiving. I mean, this was just. It ended up becoming a shootout. I kind of thought this game was going to be a little bit more defense heavy, but obviously that did not happen. I mean, we went into halftime. It was 23-13, and then all of a sudden everything just basically went to shit. It was an offensive type game, and I do think if Trevor Lawrence was in this game, this would not have been an OT game at all. I think this would have been Clemson by 14 at least. But like I said, Notre Dame's a good team. They just don't have the competitiveness to keep up with these top tier Power 5 index teams, and their schedule doesn't help them at all. So Notre Dame will get a good bowl game, but I don't see them cracking that top four to make the playoffs. But
Uh, it's like
I mean,
a pretty good just take on the game. Another game that a lot of people aren't necessarily talking about, but I think really is one of the bigger games this weekend was this BYU team who a lot of people were saying hadn't really played anyone. They um had a pretty easy schedule. And they finally had their first test against a Boise State team who has historically been, a top 25 powerhouse. And they find a way to win. They are on the independent circuit, which is kind of unfortunate for them. They won't be playing a conference championship, but it looks like we're gonna have a few teams this year that are gonna make this playoff committee have to at least think a little bit. I mean, they've been whooping teams this year. This BYU team, only one game this year was a struggle for them, and that was a pretty ugly game in all aspects. with you, University of Texas San Antonio, I mean, I think that this, all these independent teams this year, as well as these smaller conference teams, which we can just roll right into with the Cincinnati team that's undefeated, a Coastal Carolina team that's undefeated. All these teams that are sitting there undefeated, it's going to make this decision for this committee pretty challenging.
Right, and one thing I want to take away. So we're talking about these little schools that are unbeaten currently, and I want to go back to this Coastal Carolina team. Um, they're playing in the Sun Belt, but the way that they have been playing, they deserve to be in the top six at least for now. Barring how the rest of their schedule plays out, I would like to see this Coastal Carolina team at least be considered for a top six spot going into these that decision because they have been playing extremely well. They haven't really had a bad game to set per se so far in, and they're 7 games deep into the playoff. I mean, in the schedule. So I think this, like you said, mentioned, this committee has a lot of tough decisions to take into consideration, but you also got to think about which teams will get the nod due to as many. And we talked about this earlier a couple weeks ago, but based on how many games each team has played. So, say Coastal Carolina finishes out and they go 9-0. Ohio State only plays, I think, 8 games. So, is an 8-0 record better than a 9-0 record? I guess only depending on if you're basing it on schedule strength. But that extra game could be a difference maker in how high ranked up they get due to playing more games and not having any issues during this COVID season.
Yeah, and I think another thing that is definitely something that needs to be, talked about in this regard is, the schedule that they have to finish out, specifically this Coastal Carolina team. They still have to face a very good Appalachian State team, as well as a Troy team that has been, fairly competitive this year. So I do think that in order for them to, obviously make it, they're going to have to beat those two teams, as well as that December 8th matchup against Liberty, which could be the battle of the unbeatens. Winner of that is going to get a pretty decent bowl game, even if they don't make the playoff. But I think this is going to be the year where, it's going to be they're going. I mean, obviously, strength of schedule is very important, but I mean, I think it's important to give these small schools a chance. I mean, what are they playing for? I mean, I understand that, like, they sit here and, if they have a decent enough schedule, I think you got to give at least one of them a chance. Maybe if it is this BYU team who's just beating opponents by, you know, huge numbers, and or maybe it's this. I mean, you also have Marshall's undefeated. I mean, you have a bunch of teams who are sitting there undefeated. Since Cincinnati. I mean, you're gonna have to give one of them a shot. I think, in my opinion, I don't think that you can put a one loss, say a one loss Florida team, or because ultimately they're probably gonna have 2 losses because they'll probably lose to Bama in the SEC championship game. I don't. Are they doing championship games this year?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yes. So I do think that ultimately that team might have 2 losses. Any Big 12 team is going to have 2 losses. I mean, you'll probably have Ohio State. I don't think a one loss. So I think if Notre Dame gets embarrassed in the ACC championship game, like I'm predicting them to do, I don't think they should be. I think an undefeated Cincinnati team should get in over a one loss Notre Dame team who gets killed by Clemson, because Clemson will be in the playoff as well. And I think that that is a big, you know, uh, I think that's a big, that game, that ACC championship game is going to be a big indicator of how this playoff is going to go.
Yeah, and I really do think that uh, the NCAA probably should have taken the same route that all the other sports have taken and done an expanded playoffs just because of this season. And I think if they had an expanded playoffs, maybe push it to 8 teams, and then have just duke it out that way. But because there are way too many good, solid teams that are going to get shafted essentially when this committee gets together and talks about their top four. And I mean, we just made a case for 3 teams that really could lose out on this committee due to the fact that they're not playing in these big, the SEC, the ACC conferences.
So there's been a lot of talks, since they obviously, made this switch to the playoff system about how 4 teams wasn't going to be enough. And I have always been from the very beginning of the playoffs, I've always thought that they should expand it to 6 teams. And the reason why is you have the Power Five conferences, right? So you have all of them who can fill up the 5 spots, the top 5, ultimately. But I think that 6 spots should be reserved for one team that is either obviously like a mid-major school that has either went undefeated, maybe one loss, like it would have given the UCFs, the Boise States, with all of the Boise State teams. You see what they do in bowl games, and they prove it year in and year out. Teams that just find a way to beat teams, and then you have like the Boise State when they beat Oklahoma, UCF beat Auburn. You have all these teams who show up and they play teams. And granted, I understand like the teams that they've been playing. Maybe that Auburn team lost in the SEC championship game, was one win away from being in the actual playoffs. I'm just saying that I think that um, it's really it's really something that they should have looked at, after the first few years and kind of pulled the interest. And I know a lot of the mid-major schools would appreciate. It doesn't even have to necessarily be that spot, because say this year we didn't have any teams that were undefeated. They were all just 2 loss teams, and obviously you're going to give it to a Power Five team. You're going to give it to an SEC team with 2 losses over a Cincinnati team who has 2 losses. But I still think that something should be looked at. It should be reviewed. And I do think that they messed up. And I think this year would have been a perfect chance to just try it out. Like it would have been a sample year. I mean, it's already abbreviated season for most teams, just playing divisional games. So I think they really missed a golden opportunity here. Um, but let's just keep rolling into games. We're getting off topic a little bit.
We did see Pac-12 come into play this weekend.
Yes.
Not much. I mean, kind of expected the outcomes of these games, but I don't really have a big takeaway from these Pac teams. I didn't really see much that jumped out at me when I was watching some of those games. I mean, the Oregon Stanford game. I mean, it was a steamroll for most of the game, and kind of expected it. This USC game though, I was a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. I mean, Arizona State actually led for part of this game, but what did you do? You think USC is a top tier contender, or do you think they're going to fall out of these rankings here in the next week or so?
No, and I think that they definitely did get lucky against the Arizona State team, who's fairly young. We had a high turnover this year. Having a pretty senior laden team last year. But I do think that in the Pac-12, I don't know if anybody is really going to come out of the Pac-12 specifically for the championship. I do think that this Oregon team showed against Stanford that even though the score was 20 point, it was a 21 point affair, but I do think that they definitely showed their flaws. If you watch any of the game, I do think that um, I do think that they are very beatable. Um, Other than that, though, the Pac-12 just is one of those divisions where unless a team goes undefeated out of there, they're no, there's not really a bunch of good teams in that division. And I know it's just they're historically it's like the Big 12. You have teams that are ranked early and they all beat each other, and they can't. One doesn't rise above the rest. I mean, like right now you have two. I think you have what 4 2-loss teams in the Big 12 right now. That are
Yeah.
all ranked, but they're just vying for positions and stuff. And there's people who are saying that there's still a chance that this Oklahoma team, if they win out and if say this Notre Dame team loses in the a Big 12 champion Oklahoma against a one loss who lost in the ACC championship game against Clemson. I mean, if you pit those two against each other, I just don't know which one I would go with. It just depends on how Oklahoma looks the rest of this year. But you got a few big matchups in the Big 12 still to come. But this, like I said, getting back to the Pac-12, it's just not a good division. I don't think anybody comes out of it. I do think this Big 10 division has 2 teams that could potentially come out, and I want to be the first one to give myself a little bit of a pat on the back and calling this really hot start for Indiana. Um, I did. I really liked their quarterback coming into the season, which is why I said week one to watch them against this Penn State team, which obviously Penn State has kind of falling um, really really fast. But a lot of people said after Michigan won that week one game, they're like, oh, Michigan's back, and then back to back division conference losses. I mean,
We seem
what's
to
the
have
Big
this.
Ten?
We
What's
seem to have this trend where we think someone's back, and then they continue to prove to us why they aren't back. I mean, Tennessee for one, um,
I mean,
Indiana.
we finally talked about SMU and they lost to Cincinnati. We gave Miami a little bit too much credit when they lost to Clemson.
Hell, we
I
gave
mean,
Georgia
we have.
credit, and they go and get blown out by Florida this week. I mean, we just really need to not talk about teams being back.
I would well see. So I have definitely stayed away from talking about Florida just because I didn't know what with the COVID and everything with them was going to affect their season. But I did say that Kyle Trask is the second best quarterback in that conference, and I do stand by that to this day because you know Georgia has a quarterback controversy of its own. They really need somebody to step up and take that
Stand
job.
out, yeah.
Yeah, because right now there's not really a clear cut. Stetson Bennett obviously did get banged up, but he has not risen to the occasion. But I mean, if you look around, I just don't see another guy who you could really even put in that conversation. I mean, Kellen Mond from Texas A&M. I mean, he's been okay. I mean, he's been efficient enough for his team to keep winning. But it's going to be interesting to see how he performs against. I mean, he's got the Auburn Tigers still, as well as Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is struggling this year, but they're always been kind of a thorn in Texas A&M side. Always finding a way to play them really tough. So I think it's going to be important for Texas or not Texas, Florida to keep rolling, and I do think that hey, if I'd give them a shot against Alabama, maybe.
Mm, it's a tall task. I mean, maybe. If see, and Kyle Trask has been a little streaky over the course of this abbreviated season, but this week he definitely was on. I mean, 474 for 4 touchdowns. There's not really another quarterback, even the past couple weeks, that has thrown for those types of numbers. We had one from oh, I can't think of his name off the top of my head right now. But anyway, I do think this Florida team is for real right now. They are 4-1 in a tough SEC division. They still have the brunt of their schedule to go. I mean, like you said, they have really. I mean, their schedule is in their favor the rest of the way through. They have games against Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Tennessee, and LSU. If Tennessee gets back on track, maybe that Tennessee game will be a good game to watch. But it looks like Florida could win out in an easy type of fashion. But going to some two-loss teams that are actually playing surprisingly well. Texas won again this week. They played a good West Virginia team that just came off an upset last week. I mean, Texas is now finding ways to win after finding ways to lose those two games. I mean, do you think Texas could actually try to make a run if teams start losing and we don't see any unbeaten teams come out of this regular season?
Well, I think that this is a big test for the Big 12. There is a few games that I was talking about that I definitely need to be circled on the schedule. You have Iowa State versus Texas in that Week 9 matchup. That's going to be very huge in terms of Big 12 championship. Um, and I think that the winner of that game will probably be in that game. Then you have Oklahoma State, who still has yet to play Oklahoma, which is coming up this weekend. That game is or next weekend, excuse me. It's going to be a very good game. Um, this Oklahoma team is probably going to win the game. I do like them a little bit more than this Oklahoma State team. Obviously, if you do the math equation, Oklahoma was beat Texas and Texas beat Oklahoma State, so therefore
Therefore,
Oklahoma should beat Oklahoma State. But UCF knows a little bit about that. They beat Auburn. Auburn beat Alabama. Alabama was the national champion. Just saying.
I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces in that diagram.
I'm just saying UCF national championships of what was it 2017, 16,
2018.
2018.
I think it was 2018.
That's why yeah, it was deep. But yeah, anyway, but yeah, Big 12 football gonna be interesting to watch. It's gonna be important. It's gonna be very heavily laden on if this Ohio State team can go undefeated in Big 10 play. Because you have to say the ACC is going to get one. Either Notre Dame beats Clemson in the championship game and makes it, or Clemson comes back with Trevor Lawrence, shows the playoff committee that he's the reason why he's a game changer, and they roll over Notre Dame in the ACC championship game. So they're going to have one team, that ACC. It's obviously SEC is going to have
Gonna have
Bama.
to. Yeah.
It's either going to have Bama and Florida if Florida beats Bama, or it's going to have, you know, I mean, I'm not counting Texas A&M out of it yet, but um, they do have a lot of teams that have one loss that, barring an Alabama loss in the SEC championship game or regular season, I mean, something could happen. I mean, Alabama's a good team, man. I mean, they could slip up one day, rainy conditions or something. Mac Jones has a horrible day like I've been hoping he had for, weeks and weeks because I keep talking
And
bad about him, but it's just never happened. But I do think that if, a team loses, there's no reason why you know, a Big 12 team could slide in that fourth spot, but it's all relying on this Ohio State team losing, because it has to put a little bit of doubt in the minds of the voters, that this Ohio State team is for real, that Alabama is for real. A second SEC team, I feel like they need to lose. Um, the best case scenario for a Big 12 team to make it would be um, probably Oklahoma. I think if Oklahoma wins out, beats Oklahoma State, they'll jump in the rankings. If Texas beats Iowa State and knocks them down a peg, I do think that will bump up Oklahoma's credibility for beating Texas. And I think that Oklahoma would have to then beat Texas in the Big 12 rematch. And I do think that if that happens, and like say the Big Ten has a Ohio State team go up against an, I don't know, say like Indiana, just based on current rankings, and Indiana wins that game and they both have one loss, that could bode well for them. But I do think best case scenario for a Big 12 team would be Alabama winning outright SEC, locking up the only spot for an SEC team, and then Notre Dame winning and knocking Clemson out. So then you have two teams locked in, two spots available for either the Big 10, Big 12, or Pac 12. And I think that's the best case scenario for a Big 12 team. And that's
and you
also, you also need some of these mid-major teams to lose. Because I think if Cincinnati's sitting there undefeated, I mean, they already gave them the benefit of being ranked sixth overall. So I think that if, some of these teams at the top, like obviously you already had one lose. But I still think that this is going to be a very interesting. I mean, you have Cincinnati sitting there. They did drop in the rankings even though they won. Um, but I do think that this is a very interesting situation for the voters.
Yeah, and you touched on it just a second ago. But this Ohio State team, only really two games I could really see it coming down to potential upsets, and that's this Maryland and the Indiana game. I don't see Illinois, Michigan State, or Michigan beating this Ohio State. So it's up to Maryland or Indiana to force this committee's hand if Ohio State loses.
I think it's just important that all of these, teams that are uh fighting for a spot, they just have to stay healthy. That's been the Achilles heel. It seems to be. We'll talk about that a little bit in the NFL with teams losing really key players to injuries, and I think that we'll talk about that, like I said, in just a second. But I think it's going to be important to stay healthy. Because there's a lot of talented teams that lose games because of not having their star players. I mean, think of that Indiana Penn State game. I mean, if Penn State has their star running back, um, that guy might not have scored and given Indiana a shot. He might have been smart enough to fall down on the 1 yard line. It's all it trickulates downhill. So it'll be a fun weekend. I can't wait to preview next weekend's games. We got a bunch of big games next weekend, and we'll preview those on Friday. So, with that being said, let's get to the professional level. That the guys who get paid are I guess college athletes get paid, but in their own
And
way.
scholarships and
Not
tuition, right?
endorsements.
And illegal back endorsements here. Remember, you're not allowed to take gifts. But regardless, moving on to the pros.
big,
So,
big weekend in sports.
I mean, huge games.
Huge games, huge playoff implications for a lot of these games. Obviously, we talked about it on the pre-show. If you got to tune in on Facebook, um, but we'll just start. We'll just start at the top. I mean, exactly kind of what I predicted was, this Atlanta team would have a bounce back. I mean, this is probably one of their last games that they really are going to be favored to win. I think they were favored to win, even though they are obviously had the worst record. But I do think that this might be one of the last ones that they are favored to win. Specifically because they are going up against the Saints team, who we will talk about in a little bit, twice. And I mean, maybe the Chargers game. Obviously, the Chargers found a new way to be the Chargers this week, which we'll talk about in a second. But other than that, I do think that this Falcons team is probably going to lose the rest of their games. So they're probably going to be looking at top 5 draft pick, if I do say so myself. But Atlanta, maybe this is going to be their stepping. They're going to shoot off into the uh, NFC West or NFC wild card chase and win out. But
I mean, you say that, but Atlanta almost found a way to lose this game as well. I mean, 21 points in the fourth quarter, and they lost because of a pen. I mean, they won because of a penalty. I mean, almost lost this game. If that penalty had not occurred, I think maybe we're talking about a different game. But Drew Lock had a phenomenal day. I mean, playing from behind most of the game, he kept his team in it. He looked crisp with his passes. Jerry Jeudy had another tremendous receiving game, 125 yards, 1 touchdown. The defense played pretty well up into the fourth quarter. They limited the points and the damage in the fourth quarter to give them the opportunity to win. And a costly penalty late in the fourth quarter in a 2-minute drive. They had 10 seconds left. It just came down to snapping the ball 1 second, and we could be talking about a Hail Mary that goes for a tie game going into OT. But I mean, Denver looked good. Their upcoming schedule does not really bode well for them. I think this is basically the end of their season as well. I mean, their next 4 games are going to be very hard to win. I mean, they can beat the Raiders. We saw a good Raiders team this week. We'll talk about that later. The Dolphins game, Saints, Chiefs, Panthers, Bills, Chargers, and another Raiders game. So it looks like this is the end of this Denver team. Potentially trying to push for a playoff spot. I don't see that happening. Their schedule is extremely difficult from here on out, so it's just kind of time to just hone Drew Lock in and try to build around this team because this team could be good. I'd say within 3 years, maybe 2.
so I'm curious in this game. So you said that Atlanta almost found a way to lose this game, and I do think that obviously they had pretty poor clock management at the end. Ultimately, they couldn't get a huge first down. They did get stuffed on 3rd and 6, and ultimately had to punt the ball away. But I do think that the defense did show up when it needed to on that last drive. Ultimately locking them down for 4 straight passes, as well as um, essentially obviously the illegal shift didn't help, but they did find a way to win, and this is something that this team has historically not been able to do. So I do give a little bit of credit to them. However, we're gonna go to the next game, and I am very happy that I stuck with my gut whenever we were making picks on Sunday. And something that I did not think would happen would be that this Bills defense, even though they are riddled with injuries, found a way to, harass Russell Wilson. I mean, he's like, if you think of all of the historically bad teams this year, and especially in that NFC East, you have some really bad teams like the Bengals, but this is the most times that a quarterback has gotten hurried in a game all season. And this is, you got the Giants in the league, the Washington football team in the league. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think that the NFC West leader had this happen to them. But they were just getting after Russell Wilson.
I mean, yeah, dude, this defense came to play, forcing 4 turnovers on Russell Wilson, something we don't see happen often. And Josh Allen had once again, another MVP performance. I mean, he was kind of slowing down there for a couple weeks, but he picked the right game to show up and show out. Buffalo's really making a case for this number one seed in the playoffs. I mean, barring any complications with this Steelers team, it's honestly it is between Buffalo and Pittsburgh at this point, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that uh, it's going to be very, very important for this Bills team to not get a big head this week. They do have a really talented team in the Cardinals coming to town who are going to be looking to get revenge, for ultimately getting upset in what most people would say. Um, even with them coming off the victory, they just have to stay hungry. How they played in the first 3 quarters is how they need to play every game. Obviously, that fourth quarter, they kind of got a little lax on defense, and they can't do that against good teams in competitive games. Even with a 1-2 touchdown lead, you still just can't do that. Especially, I do like the Bills. I do think that they'll probably they'll probably lose probably 2 more games, and they'll probably be the number 3 seed in this playoffs. I don't think they'll be number 1. I think they'll be behind the Steelers and the Chiefs. Obviously, that can all change if they somehow win. If they go if because they do play the Steelers at home, which is to their advantage. Josh Allen historically has played good at home. Kind of a weird game this weekend though, as well for being in Buffalo and being 70 degrees and literally zero wind, which is one of the crazier things of the weekend. But I think that this Bills team is definitely trending at the right time. They do need to get completely healthy. They have this game next weekend. Then they roll into the bye. I think that if they can escape with victory against Arizona, go into the bye, and get everyone healthy, hopefully, I think this team is going to be one to reckon with come late season playoff time.
But yeah, it's just a phenomenal performance from Buffalo this week. Got to give credit when credit's due. They played well.
And Russell never quit either, and I want to give them credit.
No.
Playing with their 4-string running back, Russell definitely tried to do, and obviously there was a few times where he tried to do too much. Think about it. He threw a pick on 4th and goal. Trying to get his team some points. Yeah, you 3 points there. You still lose this game with that 3 points. You still lost by 7. It's one of those things where it's like, he was just trying to make a play. He's doing what players can do. Obviously the strip sack by AJ Klein was kind of huge, but he didn't even see him coming. His eyes are downfield. He couldn't prepare for that's a grown man running full speed at you, hitting you. I wouldn't hold on to the ball either. I don't think anybody would.
Dude.
Yeah, he's a big dude. So I do think that he didn't give up, and that is one thing that makes Russell who he is and why he's. I think he's still the lead candidate for the MVP. He's on a historic pace. And, obviously this one kind of slowed him down a little bit, brought him back down to earth with a measly 2 touchdown performance, which is more than like half the quarterbacks in the league this week. So I do think that it's, It both teams should be proud of their performance. Hopefully with Chris Carson coming back in the next few weeks, this Seattle offense gets it together. But I do think that the Buffalo Bills kind of use the blueprint, and I think many teams will use this blueprint to beat the Seattle team. Run that zone defense, crossing routes are just gashed them today. Or gashed them yesterday. Josh Allen had a field day. Nice, easy 10-yard passes, and then I think some of those receivers ran 15 yards without getting even touched.
Yeah, they definitely took advantage of a a weak secondary, and I mean they've struggled all season. I mean, a lot of their games have come down to just shootouts, and I think that's going to hurt them when it comes time to play playoff football. We are going to see extremely good defenses in the playoffs, and Seattle has to be ready for their defense to compete. They have to be at that Legion of Boom level, and I just don't know if they can.
Another team that's defense is kind of a little iffy sometimes. This Tennessee team got back in the W column. They did kind of let off the gas, it seemed, after they went up by 21 points in the fourth quarter, as their defense gave up two touchdowns in the last 5 minutes. But they did secure the victory. I mean, their defense came to play, shut them out 3 quarters, which is why, obviously, they were kind of I would say that if I had to give them a statistic, I think it was a bend don't break kind of mentality. I mean, the opening drive they turned it over on downs. They did give up a lot of field position. They gave up one big play towards the end of the first half, instantly made them punt. It's just they made a huge obviously momentum swing was the fumble return for a touchdown by the defense. So I mean, obviously, any game that your defense gets points, especially in obviously Desmond King was the one who returned it. And for those of you who don't know, he was their acquisition at the trade deadline. So I do think that obviously the whole season's been about this Bears defense. They have still yet to find a quarterback who can do enough for them to win. Listen, I'm talking to Chicago Nation right now. You guys still have plenty of season left. You only have 4 losses. If you can sit here, I mean, you play the Lions, the Vikings twice, the Texans, and if you can beat the Jaguars, I mean,
You
you
guys are
have
still sitting good.
6 wins there easily. Obviously, you have to play the Packers twice. Depends on what Packers team shows up. I mean, obviously, you're gonna have to outscore Aaron Rodgers, and that's something that they haven't done yet. And I do think that if Mitchell Trubisky gets healthy, I think you got to at least throw him in there for a half.
Right, and I mean, leave it to Chicago to try to do Chicago things once again. Wait until the fourth quarter to try to post a comeback. Um, Nick Foles obviously wasn't able to get it done. Tennessee got out with a W. However, I still want to talk about the Chicago defense. Derrick Henry, 68 total yards. Not many defenses have been able to contain this run game, but the question everyone knows: what was most effective for the Chicago team to shut down the Derrick Henry show? Because, like I said, Derrick Henry has been going off on defenses all year, and he finally ran into a stout front seven. Do you think it was the? Do you think this was more just the O line couldn't get the blocks in to get him out, or was this defense just overpowering and that dominant?
No, I think that this front seven is the reason why the Bears have been in any game this season. I think that they are very good, talented. They have a good, talented um, linebacker core headed by Roquan Smith and Danny Trevathan. And then you have a really, really, really solid, safety in Eddie Jackson, and the cornerbacks are playing outstanding. But I do think that it comes down to this defense just being really good and really talented. They really just never gave Tannehill an opportunity to throw the ball downfield. Obviously, the one big play in the game was the 40-yard touchdown pass to AJ Brown. A lot of that, I mean, if you watched, it wasn't necessarily a just he gashed him. It was he made a play. And I just think that when it comes down to it, is it Nick Foles? Is it Mitch Trubisky? One of them has to figure out what's going on, and I think a lot of that has to do with the lack of running game as well. This offensive line is going to have to find a way to make holes for David Montgomery, because they kind of lost that passing back and Tariq Cohen for the season, and that kind of takes away a dimension because David Montgomery is not the best when it comes to being a receiver out of the backfield. So I think that this team has a long ways to go to make the playoffs, but I'm still confident in them to make a run late here in the season, especially with just how their schedule lines up.
Right. And transitioning into another stellar defense is this Indianapolis Colts game against Baltimore this week. If you look at the score, you would have thought Baltimore was in control the whole game, but that was not really the case this game. Indy's defense kept this game so much closer than it could have been, and honestly, they contained the Lamar Jackson. I mean, he had one touchdown on a rushing attempt, but they didn't let him get it done through the air, and I think that was important. It's just once again, Philip Rivers could not get the job done. So when do we think it's time to maybe put Jacoby Brissett back in behind center here?
I think that a lot of this doesn't necessarily fall on him. I believe a lot of this falls on the running game. Um, it is a very interesting way that they're handling this rushing attack. Um, obviously, they drafted a running back this year in Jonathan Taylor. He hasn't really had the yards, per attempt that, a lot of people would like to see, averaging under 5 per game. But I do think that um they need to give him a few more carries. I think if they would give him a bigger workload, I think that this team would be a little bit better off. Obviously, the leading rusher in this game kind of surprised a lot of people, but it was Jordan Wilkins. Um, he had 11 carries. I do think that the running game is very important for this Indianapolis Colts team because if they can control the ball, drive the ball down the field methodically, score some points. The receiving core is definitely stepping up. Everybody um, is at least doing their part. Obviously, without T.Y. Hilton, um, it's not the best receiving core. I think that he adds an element that obviously was definitely missing. But I think that if you look at it, there is a lot of potential in this Indianapolis Colts team, and they're gonna have to figure it out fast, um especially with their remaining schedule. I mean, they have to play the Titans twice. They have to play the Packers, the Raiders, and the Steelers as well. So, very, very important that they get their head on straight and they find a way to, win these games late. So they're sitting there in the driver's seat for this wild card spot. And, possibly, I mean, they play the Titans twice. They could be a division leader if they, play this right.
Yeah, and another thing that you know Baltimore's kind of they're getting the wins, but they're just kind of skating by at this point. Do we see Baltimore running into any big problems? I mean, they play the Patriots, Titans. The only game that I see this becoming an issue is against the Steelers here. Um, I mean, and then they play the Browns, the Jags, and the Giants. So their schedule is in favor for them, but they could still come out maybe 3 or 4 losses, and then that's really a detriment in this division with an 8-0 Pittsburgh and a 5-3 Cleveland kind of creeping up behind them.
Yeah, I think that the big thing to take away from this game is that they are probably going to struggle against the Titans and the Steelers, and I don't think the Steelers are in any jeopardy whatsoever. Even after we'll talk about them in a little bit, I do think they're not in any jeopardy. They just showed that they could play one of their worst games of the season against a really bad team and still find a way to win games. So I do think with that being said, I do think that this Ravens team is probably going to be a wild card team. They'll probably be the number one wild card team. If the Dolphins defense keeps playing like they are, they could be sitting there at one of the AFC wild card teams. And then I think either the Colts or Titans could be sitting at another one. But I do think the Browns are out. I just don't know what they are. right now. So I think that it's going to be important for both of these teams to keep winning, or they're going to be in trouble come playoff time.
Right. Um, and let's skip a couple games. Let's go ahead and talk about this Pittsburgh game while we're here. Since we're already on the topic, we can get this one out of the way. What an effort by the Dallas. I mean, they showed up, they played, and Garrett Gilbert, I mean, what a performance for him. 243 yards, one touchdown, one interception. It wasn't MVP like highlight material, but he kept Dallas in this game. He made plays when he needed to. He didn't force the ball. He had one mishap of a throw, and it turned out to be an interception. But they played the Steeler team all the way to the fourth quarter. Yeah, Big Ben got roughed up a little bit. He went out for a little bit. He went out for 2 minutes and then came back after half and went back in the game. But they pressured Big Ben. They didn't let the running game get to him, which is something they have been very bad at, is containing the run game. But they had held James Conner just 22 yards. They got beat one big reception by Juju. But other than that, this Dallas defense, which has been so bad this whole season, played extremely well, given that they were going in basically to a mercy killing here. But they stuck with it. They played extremely well. It was just they weren't able to secure the win because their offense was going also against a very stout defense, and they just couldn't score points.
Yeah, I think this comes down to the offensive line of Dallas. I think that them playing with basically all backups is the reason why they lost this game. They couldn't give him Garrett Gilbert the protection he needed on the last two or three drives in the fourth quarter, and I think that ultimately cost them. It seems like anytime they had any momentum, a lineman would go out, or somebody would get hurt, and I think that ultimately is. And I'm gonna say it, and I preached it on my own personal Facebook, but they have got to do something about these roughing the passer rules. I understand if somebody completely takes the head off of a quarterback. Honestly, you can just kick him out of the game. It should be immediate, ejectable offense. But you cannot tell me and sit here and tell me that Jalen Smith literally touching the top of Ben Roethlisberger's helmet is a
As a
passer.
passer,
Is a roughing the
roughing the
passer.
passer.
There's no reason why it should be. There's no room for it in this game. It cost them. It cost. I believe it cost. I believe there's another penalty earlier on in the game against the Cowboys where I believe that he blatantly tried to avoid tackling and hit the
It
calf
was incidental
with his
contact.
arm. Yeah, it was literally like he was just, trying to get out of the way and hit Big Ben in the ankle and didn't knock him over or anything, just hit him in the ankle, and it was considered roughing the passer. So I think that they need to redo the rules. Obviously it's affected so many games. Like this isn't the first time. I mean, if you think about it, there's been times where Tom Brady, when he was a Patriot, would get hit in the face area by a hand, and it would be roughing the passer, and people would go ballistic because it's Tom Brady. And unfortunately, it happened to Garrett Gilbert. One time as well this game, it didn't get called. So they just either have to get consistent on the way they call it, or just get rid of it. And I think they might as well just get rid of it while they're here, because I just think that
And I want to
it
add
needs
that
to
this
happen.
this is something that has happened to Dallas in multiple games at multiple key times that have basically cost them. I don't want to say the game because they did that themselves, but cost them opportunities to get back into the game and give them momentum to potentially win games. And it just seems like when Dallas plays, they're not only they get all of these ridiculous calls, and it dates back to, was it a catch with featuring Des Bryant and the Green Bay Packers? I mean, this team has gone through extremely questionable calls, and it has hurt them 9 times out of 10. And it's just, it needs to be looked at. The officiating needs to get better as a whole in the NFL, because there have been a lot of questionable calls in a multitude of games that have gone down to game-winning possessions or game-winning catches, and it's just, You got to get everyone together. You got to get everybody on the same page, and it has to be consistency. Because, like you just mentioned it, Garrett Gilbert got a roughing the passer, but it wasn't called. Big Ben gets tapped, and it's called. I mean, you can't call it for the premier quarterbacks if you're not going to call it for the future quarterbacks. It's just unfair. That's I ranted a little bit, but I'm just it's unreal the amount of idiocracy that
Yeah,
is
and like
games.
we complain about it, and then all of the fans of the teams that we're complaining about it for, like, oh well, you would be mad if this happened to your team. Yeah, I'd be mad if it happened to my team. If my team got gifted a victory they didn't deserve, I'm the number one who I've been preaching since, and you can attest to this because I
And he
mentioned it
actually
too.
did, and I was
We
just going to bring it up. David has actually gone on the air.
we got saved on by the LA Rams. We got a bullshit, and I say it, a bullshit pass interference call that gave us the victory that game. And I said to this day that the Rams team got screwed. And I don't think we deserve that one, but obviously the only thing that it counts for is the record. Obviously it it's does hurt the Dallas team, especially with the Giants winning. That's the only thing positive they have going for it. We can just jump into that one. This is a stinker of a game. This did turn out to be, unfortunately for Washington fans, you guys had the game, in my opinion. Obviously, you started off slow, but you were showing promise with Kyle Allen. Ultimately got hurt in the first half and did not return. Looks like he has a serious ankle injury, so it's going to be Alex Smith or Dwayne Haskins for the rest of the year. Um,
I think you give it to Alex Smith. He looked really good in this game, and I mean, yeah, he's playing the Giants, but he was kind of the three interceptions were just inherent throws. I mean, two of them definitely could have been avoided. He kind of just let the ball go, but one of them was caused by a receiver. So I mean, he obviously would like to take back those three passes, but barring those, I mean, 325 yards and a half. It's just
Yeah, unfortunately, they came at really key times. At the end of the half, a chance to make it 20-6 game or even a 20-10 game. I think that one is really going to be. He's going to be watching film and really look back, and that was a really crucial point. With the way that this game ultimately turned out. But this is no knack on these teams. Ultimately, I think that with the way that this is kind of, I do think that this is the Eagles' division to lose at this point. All of the other teams really have shown that they are really don't have the tools to be successful. I think that this Philly team just needs to do enough to win games.
and I mean even this whole division can't string games along to make their team the clear cut choice. Philly can win two and then lose four, and I mean Washington has done the same thing. They can win a game, but they can't string multiple wins together to get out into first place. And I mean, New York has played two really good games over the past 2 weeks. Once against Tampa Bay, and this one against Washington. Completely two ends of the spectrum of the type of caliber teams that we're seeing in the league. But one just comes out as a loss. One came out as a win. And I think it's basically the first team to string along 2-3 victories will end up coming out of this NFC East. But it, like you said, it is Philly's division to lose. That tie is actually probably going to help them when it later on to determine that first place team in this standing. So I mean, not much really to talk about in that game. It was just kind of it was a game. It didn't really have much. I mean, I guess playoff implications, but not really. It was just kind of there. It was just played. But now, one of the most intriguing matchups of the week was this Kansas City and Carolina game. Did you expect this game to come down to the wire like this?
I really didn't. I do think that um I I do think that this is a very good indication on that this Chiefs team, while they are one of the best in the AFC, they are beatable. And I do think that a lot of people whenever I had made a comment about this when they played against the Bills. I did say I would rather play this. I would rather have my secondary having to worry about all their weapons than them being able to do what our defense couldn't stop, and that was run the ball. Also, it kind of limited our passing attack, which obviously we proved this past week that is one of our strongest suits after trying to run the ball in the last few games. And I think that if you can outplay this Kansas City team, and I think this has proved it. A Carolina offense who looked revamped with the return of Christian McCaffrey. I do think that we did kind of not give Teddy Bridgewater really enough credit. Obviously, he did good enough to have his team within, you know,
He
a.
kept up.
I mean, he was within. Like if the punter of the Panthers tilts that ball a half an inch to the left, that is a drilled 69-yard field goal, longest in NFL history, and they lose on that. Like it was, it had the distance. That thing would have been going from 72. Um, I,
It just barely wouldn't.
it just was wide right, and I mean, it's just all it is. As a former special teamer, I can tell you that all it takes is a little bit of you either kick. If you don't completely kick the back of the ball, if you kick the side of it, if you kick the laces, if you kick it at the wrong tilt, I mean, it's crazy how a little bit will. And this, if you can shut down Clyde Edwards-Helaire, this team is very beatable. Patrick Mahomes, while he is the best quarterback in the NFL, he is beatable. And
But I don't think this was them stopping Clyde Edwards. This was kind of on Kansas City. The fact that they ran the ball 12 times in a game is really, I want to say, kind of daunting in the fact that you have two good running backs and you're not utilizing them. You're making your offense go one dimensional. And if teams start realizing that they only have to worry about the passing game, this Kansas City team is going to go from 8-1 to potentially 8-4, 8-4, 8-5 upcoming their schedule because they need to get that rushing game back and they need to implement that into this offense instead of having Patrick Mahomes carry the team on his back like he has been trying to do. I think that's going to be Kansas City's Achilles heel currently. I mean, their defense looks good, but they need to get this running game back into this play calling.
The crazy thing is, if you would have looked at their schedule, 3 weeks ago, you'd have been like, oh wow, these next 2 weeks are going to be their toughest test of the season. But it's looking like this Dolphins team that they're going to have to face, and this
The
Saints team
Saints team.
are going to be the two toughest. That are going to, they're going to have to play. While I love Patrick Mahomes as a player, he's a smart quarterback. He doesn't make dumb decisions, only having one interception this year. I want to, take all of those Chiefs fans back a step. I understand that he's breaking records and stuff, but I did see somebody put that he is the best quarterback of all time on their Facebook. And I'm sorry, but the dude has played for what, 3 years? There's no way that you can say that. I don't even care if in his first year, if they would have beat that Patriots team and made the Super Bowl, and he would be 2-2 in Super Bowls, and this is his third year, still wouldn't even be the best quarterback of all time. He's on pace to be but he has to have a sustained career. All it takes is one injury, and that dude is done. And you'll forget who Patrick Mahomes is in 2-3 years. Like it is a cutthroat business. Fortunately for him, he's got a good offensive line right now. But he just got all that money. Tyreek's gonna get money. You're gonna have to pay Kelsey. You're gonna have to pay all of these guys. And eventually, you're not gonna be able to afford protection, and you're gonna have to show us that you can do it on your own, or you're gonna have to make some of these receivers. You're gonna have no-name receivers coming in there, and obviously, he's made Demarcus Robinson, a name, Mecole Hardman, but he's gonna have to show that he can do it with a whole new cast because he's not gonna be able to afford to pay people, especially in a Kansas City market.
Now, you should have asked that person, why are y'all forgetting about that Alex Smith career in Kansas City? I mean, y'all were on his coattails for 5 years there, and he was playing extremely well. And now you just, like you said, they forgot about him. I mean, Alex Smith turned that Kansas City team around. So some people are just wishy-washy.
You know,
Whatever way the wind's blowing.
I am a huge fan. I will support my team till the day I die, but until I legitimately have any sort of reason to say anything as stupid as saying Patrick Mahomes is the greatest quarterback of all time, um, I just would never say anything like
Wait, you're
that.
saying Josh Allen's the greatest of all time?
No, I don't have a reason to
I
say
know.
that. I don't even think he's the MVP. You know, there's people who are on like Bills fan pages and stuff that are saying that he's MVP front runner right now because he beat Russell Wilson. And I said, no, he's not. And I'll give you two names who are above him right now. Russell is still above him. He is.
Aaron Rodgers.
You know, and Aaron Rodgers, exactly. Those are the two that I would put above him. He's top five. He is, but
And then you got Patrick Mahomes and Big Ben probably coming up. Actually, no. I think Kyler Murray's probably a better.
I was gonna say I don't think that Big Ben is up there. Just statistically, he hasn't necessarily been outstanding. Obviously, his team's undefeated, so if
No,
that
and I got
and he
and
shows
I got
up,
into a debate this weekend, and this is getting off track. Well, we only have a couple games left to cover. And I was standing in a room with. I'm a Cowboys fan. For those who don't know, I was standing in a room with a Packers fan and a Steelers fan. And of course, they both like to make fun of me because I'm the Cowboys fan. But then one of them had the audacity to say Big Ben is the MVP front runner. And I looked at them and I go, what? Are you kidding me right now? I mean, Dak had more passing yards and touchdowns in 3 games than Big Ben had in 5. And he's finally now performing well. But you still got to talk about Aaron Rodgers, who is having a huge year, and Russell Wilson, who is basically that whole team. And it's just, you can't make half-hearted comments and expect people to agree with you. It's just not how that works.
you know, somebody who is looking poised potentially to be the MVP if it doesn't go to a quarterback is this running back from Minnesota who has come alive these last 2 weeks. Um, you know, sitting there with 12 touchdowns and I mean, you got to put some respect on my boy Dalvin Cook.
And this is what a healthy Dalvin Cook looks like, and it is scary.
I mean, he's sitting there just under 900 yards, 12 touchdowns. You know, he's got a receiving touchdown and 173 yards of receiving to go on top of that. Only one fumble in the year. I mean, you got to give him a little bit of um, credit for that. I mean, he's averaging, he's played 8 games, so he's averaging over 100 a game. He's averaging over a touchdown and like 1.1 a game touchdowns. So I mean, here if he continues this trend, I mean, if it doesn't go to a quarterback, it very well could be the Dalvin Cook MVP year. I couldn't see why, especially if Minnesota makes a late run at an NFC playoff spot.
Yes, and that's something I kind of wanted to touch on. And barring, if these top tier quarterbacks start, coming back down to earth and start having some pretty bad games, and Minnesota does make that late push and gets into the playoffs, it will be because of Dalvin Cook, and I do think the MVP award should go to him if he turns this whole season around for Minnesota. This team was looking extremely bad through the first half of the season, and now they are looking like they could actually pull off a miracle. But I mean, Dalvin Cook has been ridden with injury over the course of his career, and the fact that he is extremely healthy this year, I mean, this is what we would have been seeing for years if he would have played the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun to watch him go down the stretch.
And I mean, honestly, if you're not talking about Dalvin Cook being an MVP candidate, Derrick Henry would be right up there with him. I mean, he hasn't had as many extremely talented games as Dalvin Cook, but he has had some tremendous games this year that has put him at least into consideration if it doesn't go to a quarterback.
Yeah, and obviously he did just finally give up the rushing lead this week with the monster performance by Dalvin Cook. So it'll be an interesting race to see who the best NFL running back is this season. We're just gonna hit a few games. Yeah, a few more games. We're gonna speed through. Obviously, just because there wasn't a whole lot to talk about of these games. Um, this Las Vegas Los Angeles game can be pretty much summed up by that last Chargers drive.
Possession.
Yeah. Ultimately, they found a new way to lose. Historically, they have just been a um a bad franchise. They have just found a new way to lose. Ultimately, throwing what was the game-winning touchdown, only to get overturned at the end of the game, which is just heartbreaking for, especially in a young Justin Herbert who's playing outstanding this season. Um, Raiders finding a new way to win. If they can keep winning these games, who knows? Maybe they'll have an AFC champion or an AFC playoff spot. I mean, they have a pretty easy schedule the rest of the way, excluding the matchup against the Chiefs in 2 weeks. But I mean, the rest of it are all winnable games. So let's see if this Raiders team can get hot and make a push at the playoffs.
They need Josh Jacobs to get hot though, because he is not looking good right now, and I don't think Derek Carr can get to the playoffs on his own accord.
Oh, I think they do have a three-headed monster there. Obviously, with monsters a little bit of a loose term, but they do have three running backs who all can chip in. Jalen Richard, Devontae Booker, and Josh Jacobs. I do think all of them can make an impact, and I think they just need to share the load and just. I know that like in the last few games, Jalen Richard had the yards last week. Booker had the yards this week. Josh Jacobs had the touchdown, as well as Devontae Booker had a touchdown. And then you had last week, Jalen Richard had 2 touchdowns. So I think it's just to share the load. It's play the hot hand, the hot back. So
and it's working. So
it's working. Keep it going. I do hope that this Raiders team beats this Chiefs team. Sorry, Chiefs fans, but I just want to see you guys lose. I never root for the defending champion in any sport whatsoever. It's just something I do as a fan of the game. I hate repeat champions.
I do have a question for you.
Yes.
Because I know what game you're going to, and I want to ask you a question. Did your opinion change for this Miami team with this quarterback? I know you and I.
I'm going to explain why. Okay. Again, Tua was saved by his defense, and I say it, and you guys are going to keep getting on to me, but I'm going to tell you this reason why. First of all, they scored 7 points again in a game for him, which gave him points. Excluding 2 drives in the first half, that accounted for over half of his yards. I mean, pretty mediocre stuff here, if you do say so myself. Obviously this wasn't all Tua, but a big chunk of the yards in his touchdown drive in the second half, his 93 yard that a lot of the announcers were saying was methodical and, this is the future of the Dolphins. Well, I'm going to tell you this. Defensive pass interference gave them a huge chunk of that. Also, a lowering the helmet to initiate contact penalty by Budda Baker was also given on that drive. As well as, obviously he did have a good run on that drive, but it just really, most of those yards were penalty yards. But other than that, I mean, a 24-yard drive, a 28-yard drive, it was enough to get him a field goal. But I mean, the Cardinals turned the ball over on downs, which was one of those questionable decisions. 4th and 1, you think that they could get a yard, they didn't, and that ultimately cost them the game. With them missing the field goal late in the game. But I still don't think it's he has potential, and I will change my opinion slightly. He has potential, but it is still not to a time. And when they play a team that has a defense that is good enough to score points or to force turnovers, like this is no knack on the defense of the Cardinals, but they have historically, they've been getting in shootouts this year. But if they face a good team and like with a stout defense, and I'm particularly looking ahead at their schedule. This game against Kansas City is going to be ugly for Tua if he is still the starter then. I mean, this is the stretch where I told him that they should have started him against the Chargers, Denver, New York. 3 defenses who are below average, really could give him a good, I mean, obviously you guys you're going to play them in the future. These are 3 future, teams that you're going to face a lot, being in the AFC. But I think that while I do believe he has potential, I just don't think it's still his time yet. Only 248 yards. It just wasn't enough for me, in my opinion. Obviously, he's hurt by the lack of rushing attack, but he has shown potential, but it's still not to a time. And I'll stick by that until he puts up like 400 yards this week against this Chargers defense or something, which will probably
Right.
happen.
But still, Kyler Murray putting up video game numbers again. Like, what can Kyler Murray not do? I mean, 283 yards in the air, 3 touchdowns, and 106 yards on 11 carries in 1 touchdown. I mean, this dude is unbelievable. And this whole NFC West standings still, it's anybody's game at this point. I mean, are you who do you think, and this is just off of everything right now, who comes out of the NFC West as the number one?
I mean, I think it still falls in the Seahawks hands. I do think that this offense is good, and I think the defense is going to be good enough to um you know uh right the ship. I do think that they have a very intelligent coach in Pete Carroll that's going to look at how his defense was kind of torched this week, and I do think that he'll find a way to patch that up. So
All right. And I would like to apologize to the Saints fan base. Are you guys tired of proving me wrong yet? I mean, you guys are doing a very good job at making me look really bad. So a couple weeks ago, I talked about how the Saints were not good enough to make it to the playoffs. And I would like to retract that statement because I do think the Saints team is for real. And they just added Michael Thomas back, who didn't have a great game, but with him in the offense, this really changes the complexity of the game. And that defense really just took it to Tampa and forced turnover after turnover after turnover on a very good Tampa Bay offense. So, I mean, this Saints team is for real, and I do think they have a shot at coming out one of the top 3 seeds in the NFC.
So I just want to start by saying that I do think that I kind of overestimated. I thought with 2 weeks of practice, Antonio Brown would be a little bit more of prepared for this offense, but I think that I want to blame this completely on the coaching staff of Tampa Bay. You talked about running the ball only 12 times. I understand getting behind early, thinking that you need to force the ball down the field, but this team lives and dies by the play action pass, and that's what and throwing the ball to the running backs. Obviously they did throw to Leonard Fournette 6 times and Ronald Jones 3 times. So obviously 9 out of the 22 catches were by a running back. I do think that it's something that um, they need to just keep running the ball. Even when you're down, like at the very start of the game, they tried to force the ball back down the field after, the costly um the costly turnover or in the first drive. You know, are- it's something that needs to be addressed. The play calling is terrible. Um I do think that this Tampa team still has potential. They still have a lot of football to play. Um they do still have a very important matchup. Down the road with the other team in their division with the Falcons twice. So I think that this is a team that's very poised for the playoffs still. No need to hit the panic button yet, but it is a step back time and say the Saints are for real. I appreciate you for finally, getting on board with me. Obviously, I thought Tampa was going to play better, which is why I picked them on Sunday. But I do think that this Saints team was for real from the beginning, and I do think that when Michael Thomas returning, they will emerge as a serious, serious threat to Tampa Bay in this division. But
And
it's still anybody's game.
but I also just think that they do have to clean up they do have to clean up their turnovers. They did turn the ball over twice on fumbles, so they got to clean up that aspect of the game. But I think just having Michael Thomas in the game, it boosts their confidence. You know, and you kind of saw a shaky defense in the beginning of the season where they were losing these close games. But now you're seeing the Saints defense that is run it down your throat. They don't give you any. They don't give anything away. They're good at hiding, those spy packages where they have the safety coming in on the deep side, and they caused confusion with Tom Brady, who doesn't really throw many picks, but they just got to him, and I think this is the turning point. Not a turning point for the Saints, but this is the win, the dominant win they needed over a good team to keep their confidence as to, hey, this is our season. We're in win now mode. Let's go out and let's contend for the Super Bowl. But yeah, I had to say that because it was just kind of like, well, I'd been talking trash on the Saints all year, and finally, I'm over it. I admit I'm wrong. The Saints are for real. So that's all I can say on that matter. And now moving on to tonight's Snorefest.
False. False. I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you
Oh
say it
God.
that I was right about
Oh.
Jake Luton, and that I was right because he did outperform Deshaun Watson and put his team in a chance to win the game, and he almost did it. I think that on that last play call they should have ran the ball, in my opinion, on that 2-point conversion. But hey, I'm not the coach, but Luton Mania was running wild. Um, and I do think that you know I was kind of right.
See there, but the issue is you said you were kind of right. So I will kind of apologize and kind of admit that Jake Luton has the potential to carry the Jacksonville team to new heights that Gardner Minshew could not. Gardner Minshew could not keep the consistency from when he first got into. He had his breakout performance. He actually kind of reminds me. He reminds me of the Jeremy Lin of basketball. He came out, played extremely well for a streak, got the nickname, got everything he needed, but then kind of faded off into the distance. And yeah, you hear about him on occasion, but he really didn't bring as much to the team as everybody thought he would bring. And now being replaced, I think this kid's the answer for this team as of right now. So yes, I'll give you that. So that's all you're getting out of me. You were kind of right. So give it a few weeks though. If they're still trending up in a few weeks, I will fully admit it for you because I can't. Like you said, you can't go off a one sample game. The Jets Patriots game just kicked off. Um, what's your prediction? I mean, do we see 20 points being scored?
No, and I don't think that the Patriots will lose this game, but I do think it's going to be a lot closer than people think, and I think that the offense of the Jets is just gonna run the ball down the throats of this Patriots defense, who kind of showed vulnerability against Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. So I think that will be a very key matchup to watch in this game.
I think if there is a game the Jets possibly squeak out a win, maybe it'll end up being an officiating call. The Patriots blow something. I think this is a trending topic for the Jets, and I think they might pull something out here tonight. Now, now Wednesday when we come back and it's like a 32-0 route, then yeah. But for now, the Jets will play this Patriots team extremely well. So now, with that being said, that concludes our NCAA and NFL talk. Don't forget to tune in Wednesday for us talking about the MLB awards that are coming out this evening, actually, as we speak. We're gonna go over the Masters that starts on Thursday. We're even gonna cover a little bit of MLS, which is the first. It's the first time we're gonna talk about it all year because decision day was this weekend and we got playoffs upcoming. So, got anything you want to add?
No, that's good enough for me. We'll catch you guys next time.
There
Peace.
you go.